Radio Kingston, AM 1490, FM 107, number one record for country pop singer Eddie Rabbitt back in the 80s. Love Over 89, 11 away from 9 o'clock. Delighted to have Owen Symes with us right now. Owen is a social historian, political activist, and a writer. He's based in Michigan. His new book is his first. It's called He Was Our Man in Washington, the story of Barack Obama. And Owen, so good to have you with us. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Warren. Thanks for having me.
And there's so much in this book. I wish we had even more time, but we urge our listeners to pick it up and read this story. Just an amazing outline of this 8-year period when Barack Obama was president here in the United States. He won the platform. Hope and Change was what he talked about. That was his platform back in 2008. Did he live up to that Hope and Change platform, Owen?
Well, that's one of the key questions of his administration, isn't it? I argue in the book that very much depends on your perspective. So if you're, a normal, typical liberal, a Bill Clinton kind of supporter, I think Obama did more good than bad. He changed things back from, what he saw as the kind of the disaster of the George W. Bush administration with the adventure in Iraq and forgetting about Afghanistan, helping to deregulate the economy and drive it towards ruin. And he steered that back towards more stability, pulling out of Iraq, refocusing on Afghanistan, that kind of thing. So if you were a liberal in 2016, I think Obama did more good than bad. Obviously, if you're a more socially conservative, perhaps you might not like the fact that he had more representation for trans people or gay people, or that he even mentioned the fact of racism in the United States. But even as a conservative, his economic and foreign policies were very in line with more traditional U.S. interests. Pouring troops into Afghanistan, expanding the war on terror into Africa, helping to bail out the big financial institutions to stabilize the economy. Those are stuff that both typical liberals and conservatives in the United States often agree on, even if they don't like to admit it. Whereas if you're a progressive, perhaps his Hope and Change left something to be desired. I'm not really sure how much change there really was as far as the economy went, because his objective there wasn't to radically alter things, but to try and return to some kind of stable status quo. So it really depends on what perspective you mean when you say, let's change things. Do you want to change things back from Bush? Well, I think he accomplished that more than not. But if you mean change things in some kind of fundamental way, to address systemic inequality or racism or what have you, he fell far short of the mark there, I think.
So how passionate are you about Barack Obama? Why did you decide to tell this story, write this book?
Yeah, great question. So I think for a lot of people, my recent political journey has been shaped by the 2016 election. That was somewhat of a surprise. I think even a lot of Republicans were a little confused that Trump had actually won. Everyone, I think, expected Clinton to win. So I started off trying to research the Obama presidency to try and figure out how America got to that point. What is it about the recent past that has led us to have a reality TV star as president? That seems a little bit unusual. And then as I researched, I came to have a better and deeper understanding of American history in general. I wanted to try and present that to people, to put the Obama presidency in context. A lot of times I think our political discussions are very shallow in that way. They don't have a good appreciation for the historical antecedents that get us to a particular situation. And so I wanted to try and do that. And I also kind of noticed that Trump had sucked a lot of the oxygen out of the room, and everyone was talking about him, and no one really seemed to be writing or talking or thinking about Obama very much in 2017, 18. So I thought, well, I'm the one that's doing this research. I might as well put the book together and see where it takes me. And here we are.
So significant contributions during his time in office, a lot of job growth, remarkable job growth, the Affordable Care Act, the execution of Osama bin Laden, pretty notable.
Yeah, certainly. Now, of course, there are always, caveats to any administration's accomplishments. So for instance, with the job growth, it was substantial, but it was also limited in the sense that a lot of these jobs were not full-time, or they didn't have benefits the way that union jobs used to provide, for instance, or they were in the what they call the gig economy, like an Uber kind of thing. So you don't have consistent or full-time hours. So there were definite limitations to the kind of recovery that the Obama administration helped to usher in. But it was certainly job growth. That is true. The unemployment rate did continue to go down throughout his administration, although again, not as many people were seeking work as perhaps were in 2008, 2009, and the kind of jobs they were getting were certainly not the kind of union jobs you might have expected as an American in the 1960s or 70s.
So our current president, Joe Biden, was his vice president. How well did Joe Biden do during that period?
So he was a very active vice president, not on the level of someone like Dick Cheney. You know, he wasn't a co-president or anything like that. That kind of thing is very, very unusual for a vice president. But even so, Biden was very active. So he was always the last man in the room when Obama was seeking advice and counsel from his, compatriots. That was an agreement that they had reached when Biden agreed to be VP. You know, he always wanted to make sure, even if Obama didn't agree with Biden's position, Biden would at least have the last word in a conversation, just as a mark of respect, if nothing else. So Obama didn't always listen to Biden, but Biden was always given the opportunity to air his opinions. Obama leaned on Biden heavily for foreign policy advice, which to my mind was kind of ironic because Biden was pretty instrumental in Congress in pushing through the invasion of Iraq in 2003, which seems to be a mistake of gargantuan proportions. Maybe his foreign policy advice shouldn't be adhered to, but Obama seemed to respect the man. You know, he has a long public service history and things like that. So he actually tasked Biden with taking point in Iraq in 2009, 2010 to try and help the Maliki government kind of stabilize things and make sure that when Obama pulled the troops out following the agreement that George W. Bush had signed in 2008, that things would remain stable there. So that was one big responsibility of Biden's. Another was shepherding the recovery money that came in 2009 with the Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So one of Biden's big responsibilities that Obama gave him was, all right, here's all this government money. You're to be the one that goes through and audits requests for aid. Basically, we need X amount of dollars for this startup company or a loan for this or that. So Biden was tasked with making sure that that money was spent wisely. I personally think that he was a little bit too cutthroat with that money, but there wasn't a lot of corruption or largesse under his watch. So that's perhaps an accomplishment considering our current political climate.
My guest is Owen Symes. His new book, He Was Our Man in Washington. It's his first book, the story of Barack Obama, his 8 years as president. So the First Lady, Michelle Obama, was very active as well during that period.
Yeah, and fair play to her, just like with several previous First Ladies, George W. Bush's notably. She took a very active role in public affairs. She didn't so much speak out on hard policy matters. You know, she left that to her husband, and that's usually the division between the president and the First Lady. But she did take a very active campaign in the realm of public health, notably in obesity, trying to combat that because that's obviously a very serious problem in the United States. And that did jive well with her husband's attempts to reform the American healthcare system. Now, I think, and I argue in the book, that he left a lot to be desired there. You know, when you leave private health insurance companies in power, you're going to have a very limited effect on the providing of care to people as a human right. But nevertheless, Michelle's efforts really did make an impact on a lot of people, and I'm sure helped many children battle obesity successfully.
Oh, and how did racism affect Obama's time in office, or did it?
Yeah, I would argue it very much did. So obviously he came into office in a very partisan and charged climate, right? We saw that with Bill Clinton and the impeachment and the vitriol that was there. So it was already a very partisan environment. But what racism allowed to happen was that partisan resistance hardened into this adamantine substance that he found it very hard to get past that. So healthcare is a great example of that. You know, he included a lot lot of Republican ideas into the Affordable Care Act. The whole idea of having the individual mandate, mandating people to have insurance or pay a fine, that was Mitt Romney's idea in Massachusetts. Right, the idea of using state-based markets was something that the Heritage Foundation had thought of in the 90s as an alternative to Bill Clinton's healthcare initiative. So Obama threw all these conservative ideas into his bill to try and get support. Lo and behold, he got barely any Republican votes in either the House or the Senate. And I think we can lay racism, at least as part of that, kind of sharpening that edge of the already existing partisan resistance, because it made it very easy for Republicans to see Obama as not just a Democrat and an outsider, but a Muslim and an outsider, or an Indonesian or a Kenyan and an outsider, right? This idea of othering the person, his race made that very easy for people to accomplish, whether they were consciously racist or not. I think it made it very easy for Republicans to build up this narrative that Obama was some kind of radical outsider socialist bent on destroying America, when that was very oppositely the case. He was a diehard capitalist and very, very patriotic. But his race allowed the existing partisanship to very much harden and sharpen and cut through a lot of what he wanted to do domestically.
Oh, and let me ask you this. Among the 40-plus presidents we've seen since George Washington of these United States, where would you rank Barack Obama?
Ooh, interesting question. That always gets complicated because there's a lot of factors you can include. I'm going to say he's definitely in the top half. He didn't have a lot of political scandal. Every presidency has something, but especially as an individual, he was pretty above board. He didn't get us into any foreign policy disasters on the scale of World War I or the invasion of Iraq, so that puts him up a little bit higher. The economy did grow while he was president. So definitely top half. I'd say probably top 25%. All things considered, he had a lot of stuff going against him that was out of his control. Like I said, with the Republican resistance, that level of congressional resistance is somewhat unusual in American politics. So he didn't get as much done, especially in his second term, as he might have wanted. But yeah, I would say definitely top 25%, especially, like I said in the beginning, if you're a liberal or even economically conservative. I think he did a lot that you can appreciate, even if some conservatives might not agree with some of his more socially progressive policies.
Was he a refreshing change our country needed for those 8 years?
I don't think so. And I think the fact that he tried to stabilize things in a way that was more pre-George W. Bush, Clinton era stuff versus more radical change. I think that helped usher in Trump, unfortunately, because he came into office with all this hope and change rhetoric, didn't actually change things as much as a lot of his supporters might have wanted. It seemed a lot more politics as usual. Some of that was unfair. Some of that was not Obama's fault, but some of it was. And especially in the way that the Obamacare came together, all these compromises with the insurance industry and the pharmaceutical industry and the hospital industry, that really soured people a lot who would originally have supported him. So what we saw in the 2016 election was people getting more desperate for more radical change. Some of that I think was positive, like with Senator Bernie Sanders. Some of that was obviously very negative with the openly racist and white supremacist and imperialist Trump. And so, you saw plenty of people who voted for Sanders in the primary turn to Trump in the general election because they bought his shtick of, I'm an outsider who's going to change the system. Now, of course, it turned out he was lying through his teeth because, of course, a billionaire is not really an outsider to any system. But that's what they thought, and that's what they were desperate for, because under 8 years of Obama, we didn't get the change that they wanted.
Oh, and I truly wish we had more time, but I certainly hope our listeners will pick up your book. He Was Our Man in Washington, the story of Barack Obama, the 8 years he was our president, and Owen Symes is the author of the book. Thanks so much for being with us this morning. Appreciate it, Owen.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.